The article discusses a podcast called Tacos of Texas that explores Mexican cuisine and the cultural significance of preparing food with one's hands. It highlights the stories of individuals, including matriarchs and restaurateurs, who continue the tradition of cooking and sharing recipes passed down through generations. Entrepreneur. Flip. Podcast. Soaps. Huaraches. Restaurateur. Tamale. Emeritus. Crave. Nostalgia. Chorizo. Glyphs. Flavor. Shuck. Utensils. Aspire. Ambience. Ethnic. Grandparents. Olas. Jalapeno. Codices. Indigenous. Handwritten. Fuzzy. Passionate. Proximal. Meatless.
We're tracing the decisions that gave us the housing situation we have in Austin today. In Growth Machine, how Austin engineered its housing market. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
From KUT and KUTX Studios.
Hi, my name is Bessie Martinez, and I'm a first-gen entrepreneur and Latina community founder. To me, tacos sounds like chopped potatoes thrown into a sizzling skillet on a warm Saturday morning while listening to my mama in the background singing to her favorite Ana Gabriel song at the top of her lungs. This is Bessie Martinez, and you're listening to Tacos of Texas on KUT.
Mexican hands. The ability to flip a tortilla over a hot comal or open fire without burning yourself. What's up, Taco World? I'm taco journalist Mando Rayo, and welcome to the Tacos of Texas podcast, Season 3. Produced by Identity Productions in partnership with KUT and KUTX Studios. And we're back exploring taco culture in Texas through the eyes of the people in the Lone Star State. So grab a warm and fresh tortilla, add some mantequilla, and get ready for some muy tasty taco conversations. Sabor. Today on Tacos of Texas, we're talking about Mexican hands. The kind of hands that flip tortillas over fiery comal with their bare hands. The kind that work that masa so easily into tortillas, sopes, huaraches, y más. Join us today to talk about how these recipes continue to be developed by our honored matriarchs, our mothers, abuelas, tías, and hermanas. We're talking to seasoned cook and restaurateur Diana Valera of Tamale House East, whose strong Mexican hands have been making tortillas for over 3 generations. Then we'll speak with Professor Emeritus at the University of Texas at San Antonio, Dr. Ellen Riojas Clark, to hear what she's learned through her research and cooking. Join us on today's Tacos of Texas. I got Mexican hands, do you? I got the ability to flip a tortilla in a hot comal or open fire without burning myself. That's the cooking style I grew up with, but I'm not the first Mexicano to do it because, you know what? I learned it from my mother, and she learned it from her mother, and she learned it from her mother. It's this idea that making or cooking something with your hands goes to a deeper level. It's something that's in your sangre. Even eating with your hands gives you a sense of being grounded and just, I think, more connected to the food. For years, we've watched our beloved mothers and matriarchs work those hands into the masa, into making those dishes we all love and crave, and that give us nostalgia of being a kid again. It's that care that they give, whether it's una tortillita para mí y las quemaditas para papá. It's the love and attention that moms give us that make everything taste better. But you also see it in their rugged and tough hands when they wake up before everyone else to knead on that masa as the manteca courses through their fingers, to make sure the onions are cut fine and the tomatoes are the freshest, or when they go out of their way to make that special huevito con chorizo for you. When you look at your abuelitas and mother's hands, you can see the wear and tear and love that they have given us through the work they've done in our family's kitchens. While their work may have gone unnoticed, even in or within our families, I think it's time to honor the love and work they have given us through their own Mexican hands.
A devastating winter storm, millions without power, hundreds dead. How could this happen in the energy capital of America?
The market was killing people in their homes, and I had lost faith in it. And every decision we made at that point forward was to get the lights on.
I'm Mose Bushell. I'll be your host for The Disconnect, Power, Politics, and the Texas Blackout. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
Oh, it's taco time. And now here's a word from our sponsors. From me. Vamos a Chucotown con Visit El Paso. It's the hometown of this taco journalist. For those craving an outdoor adventure, El Paso has all you need and more than you expected. Enjoy the city's convenient location to nearby state parks and sites, and explore miles of mountain trails, natural beauty, animals, and more. Towering above the city of El Paso is Franklin Mountain State Park, the largest state park in an urban setting. You can hike rugged terrain in 37 square miles of desert wilderness, scrub vegetation and open space, and conquer over 125 miles of multi-use trails that are especially popular with mountain bikers. Hueco Tanks State Park and Historic Site. At Hueco Tanks, visitors can hike, try rock climbing and bouldering, birdwatching, study nature, picnic, and stargaze. Also available are guided and self-guided tours to view ancient rock glyphs. Stop by the Interpretive Center in a historic ranch house to learn more about the park and its history. Muchas gracias to our friends at Visit El Paso for sponsoring this podcast episode. Follow Visit El Paso on Instagram and Facebook at Visit El Paso or on their website at visitelpaso.com. No fees equals more tacos at Amplify Credit Union. With fee-free banking at Amplify, you'll never pay another account fee, overdraft fee, or transfer fee ever again. And no fees means un poquito más de sabor. It's not a bank, it's a credit union, and their goal is to remove the obstacles that stand between their members and financial success. So they turned off all their bank fees, because it's not just about giving back. Sometimes it's about not taking in the first place. And you know what? Amplify is the first financial institution in Texas to put an end to bank fees. Amplify charges $0 in overdraft fees. That's right, zero. Amplify offers fee-free banking to both personal and business members. To learn more, go to goamplify.com/tacos. Our first guest is Diana Vasquez Valera. Doña Valera worked in her parents' original tamale house alongside her mother, Carmen. She lived in Mexico and Peru before returning to Austin to open up her own restaurant, Mexico Típico, and eventually helped her 5 children open the tamale house on East 6th Street. At age 72, she continues to run the all-female team at Tamale House East. Let's welcome Diana to the studio. We're in the studio with Miss Diana Vasquez Valera, matriarch of the Tamale House.
Yes. I guess that is my title now, and it's due to I'm already 74, so I guess it's my turn.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you actually got into the restaurant business.
My parents opened the original tamale house on First and Congress. It's no longer there. I was probably about 12 or 13, and I would see my parents going to this little, it was probably about 300 square feet, and they were producing tamales and tacos, and I naturally was curious and wanted to be a part of it. I took a liking to it immediately and started cooking, started preparing, started running the register, doing everything that is required of a restaurant. And so I had an early introduction to a restaurant. It was a to-go place. It wasn't a full service.
But what are the earliest memories you have of maybe her teaching you to use your hands to make something for the family?
Tamales nowadays the majority of tamales are made by machine. But back then, and even now with our restaurant, they were made by hand. So I can close my eyes and just see the women that she had making the tamales, all mothers with families and working. They would have these huge bundles of masa and put in all these spices in it and working it with their hands, you know. And I tried to do it. My hands were so little then.
Yeah.
They're not very much bigger, but it's hard. It's hard. And they would just work so hard at it and make sure and always tasting it and slapping it around and these big bundles and throwing the masa over there and then the shucks, having to get all the shucks prepared and cleaning them and taking all the little hairs out and making sure they were soft enough to spread and spreading by hand. And then the filling was another thing to do.
Yeah.
Cooking the meat. And then I remember these tamales. Back then, she would make it with a hog head. And so I remember these big hog heads, which scared me at first. I was just a kid.
Yeah.
but boy, did they give the flavor to the tamales. They just had so much mantequita,
right,
that little lard,
yes.
that it was the tamales, when you filled them, I mean, the mantequita would just come out of the little shuck when they would wrap them. And each tamale, all these thousands of tamales that they'd had to fill and count, and then they'd be gone once you cooked them. People would just eat them up so fast, and we'd have to get more out.
You couldn't keep up with the demand.
No, but I do remember so distinctly how those ladies were just, it was a party. They were just mixing that masa and slapping it around and laughing and telling jokes. And I said, why are they mixing it so much with their hand? Why don't they just get a blender or something? But they never did. It was all by hand.
Yeah.
It was long hours, a lot of work.
Yeah.
And they got through it. And I just remember, I'm going to make my tamales like that, but I don't know who's going to do it because I don't know who's going to want to do this, you know. But we do it, and we make them by hand, and it's basically the same method that my parents used and that these little ladies, and they were all about my size.
Yeah.
And I don't know how 6 or 7 ladies fit in 300 square feet with all these pots that were bigger than me.
Yeah.
I'm 5 feet, and these pots were huge. I could fit in the pot. And all of this was going on, and the window was buzzing with people, and the lines were out the door, and all this laughing and shouting and clanking, and it was just a big circus,
Yeah.
a big party.
It was a big party.
It was a big party.
I mean, that's part of our memories that we collect, right?
Yes, because even now to this day, in my kitchen with the tamale house on 6th Street, I have to have music going, and my employees, they're the same way. They're all laughing, having fun at it, because if you have to think about doing all of these tamales, hundreds of tamales, and just standing there with no emotion, how boring and how long the day would be. And so it is a party.
Yeah.
And I think that happens in homes sometimes, because when you make tamales during Christmas, it is a party.
Yep.
It is something that brings the family together and friends, and it's something that requires a lot of work, but you don't feel it if you make it a party.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the things that you cherish that you received from your mother, whether they're cooking utensils?
First of all, her commitment. Mm-hmm. She was committed to making her business a success so that she could provide for her children. And she did. She was a good mother, and it took getting up early every day. And back then, it was a 7-day week. I think about the selflessness that she had. It was always her family and others first. And she always left herself on the last. I would have to force her, let's go do this, to find enjoyment in other things and to break away, because it's easy to get stuck on one thing and forget about yourself. And you always need to make sure that you take care of the caretaker.
Mm-hmm. And is that something that you carried with you?
Oh, yes, I take care of myself. Well, I do, but
Yeah.
I do not have the word no in my vocabulary. Even when it should be no,
Sure.
I say yes, or let's see, how do we do it? I just feel that if you say no to begin with, then forget it. There's no possibility. So I do have that attitude that she had about making things possible. And I do that. And I will work, if need be, long hours or what needs to be done. And I love a party.
That I do know.
Yes, you have enjoyed our parties.
We have. When you walked in, you mentioned a couple of items that you still hold or you still use, a spoon and a pot. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I had a customer the other day. I went to the table, because I go back to tables and check everything okay and anything I can get you. And the customer said, "Oh, my God, this is so good. How do you do it? What do you do?" She says, "I try to make tamales, but the texture, it just is so soft, so yummy, and all the flavors just go through." And so I told the customer, I said, "Well, it's this, and that, but you really got to get the masa and the ingredients down. And you can only get that with your hands and with some experience. If you put someone in the kitchen that's unhappy and they try to make tamales, they're going to come out hard. They're not going to come out good. But if you put someone in there that their hands are an extension of themselves and they're happy and they can feel, they're going to mix the masa, because we still mix the masa by hand. We don't use a Hobart. We don't use a big mixer. Maybe it's superstition, I don't know what, but my mother didn't use it.
Yeah, and I think when people are at home, they're like, well, I followed the recipe. I think the missing element is
The feel.
the feel or mom's touch.
Yes, the mama's
Right.
touch, right?
Right.
You have to touch it. Yes, you have to care about it, and you do have to love it, and you have to be proud of it. You don't want to sell anything or even give anything away that is not an extension of yourself and how you feel about what you do. And so that's something that I did learn from my mother.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing what you've learned and your process and your ways. And I feel like we need to honor this work.
And all the mothers.
And all the mothers.
All the mothers that...
How do we do that?
I think that it's people like yourself, and yes, me, but all the other little restaurants that are around and doing their best and creating and maintaining the traditions of their families and sharing it with other people, that it needs to be appreciated as an art, and it's an art that is dying. I still make the tamales with one helper, and the others join cleaning the shucks, but, there's just two of us that create this consistency of the masa, that create this meat that tastes it. And it's something that many people don't want to do, don't aspire, but they enjoy eating it. And so the people that help me make the tamales, which could be one or two, I love them to death. And I thank God for them all the time. And as often as I can, I give them regalitos, and I make sure that they're happy, that they're paid well, and that they're happy, and that any problems they may have, I try to help them with it. Because all those people that work in restaurants and in the service industry have had a hard time, and they need to be appreciated. And whatever we can do to continue the traditions, what you do, what I do, what other mothers do, what other businesses do, is so important, because the world is moving so fast that we sometimes forget that what made our families great, what made our communities great, are all the mothers that never gave up and that always loved their families so much to do whatever it took to provide for them, to educate them, and to pass on whatever was taught by their grandmothers and their great-grandmothers. And so it's been a long journey, and I hope it's continues to be a long journey. When my children wanted to open the tamale house and do what my mother did and what I did, I said, oh my God, they're all good eaters. But I need to pass to them something more importantly, which is the tradition and the pride of still being in East Austin, still doing something that my grandmothers did and her mother did. And if I can impart that feeling, that belief of importance, of value, of preservation, I'm done. I've done my job, because then they will take care of it, and that they take those values to their families. Mm-hmm. And by the way, my first grandbaby I had, so now I'm busy with that.
Yay, congratulations.
I only had to wait about 50 years.
Well, now you got another loved one to pass.
And he's a good eater.
Yeah, that's how they start.
I know.
That's how we all start.
But thank you so much for allowing me to share my life and my experiences and all of the people that made me and helped put my values together. And thank you for continuing to do the work that you do to spread the good news about Mexican food and Mexican families and traditions.
Oh, it's taco time. And now here's a word from our sponsors. From me. Located deep in the heart of South Texas, Laredo is the beginning of the Lone Star State and a travel experience that is American, Texan, and Mexican all in one. This location lends itself to a perfect blend of culture, language, culinary influence, and ambiance that can only be found deep in the heart of South Texas. This small Spanish villa was founded in 1755 on the banks of the Rio Grande. Walk around the historic downtown and discover landmarks that are significant for both Laredo and Texas history. Some landmarks include San Agustin Plaza, Republic of the Rio Grande Museum, and San Agustin Cathedral. Laredo's warm weather creates the perfect ambiance for a weekend of fun and relaxation. Mexican, Tex-Mex, and just about anything else has a Laredo flair that sets it apart. So come for the authentic Mexican food and stay for the flavors. Whatever you crave, you're sure to find an amazing array of enticing selections. Muchas gracias to our friends at Visit Laredo for sponsoring this podcast episode. Follow Visit Laredo on Instagram and Facebook at Visit Laredo, Texas, or on their website, www.visitlaredo.com. Our next guest is Dr. Ellen Riojas Clark, a professor emerita at the University of Texas at San Antonio. Her research examines ethnic and cultural identity and cultural studies topics. She is executive producer for the Latino Artist Speaks Exploring Who I Am series, and she has various youth and adult publications. You might also remember Dr. Riojas Clark from our episodes on United Tacos of America. Well, Ellen, thanks so much for being on Tacos of Texas. I really appreciate you. We need to honor you with some kind of taco award for being best mentor for Mando Rayo.
Sounds good. I'll accept it. Okay.
As you know, we're talking about what I call Mexican hands. This idea of how do we really look at what we've learned from our mothers, our abuelas, our matriarchs in learning how to cook and recipes. So my first question to you is, can you describe these Mexican hands, if you will, that fed you growing up? What was cooked when you were growing up, and how did you see them doing that?
Well, I probably have a different perspective on this than what you expected, because my mother came from Fort Worth, Dallas area. So I did not grow up with Mexican food per se or Mexican-American food per se. Her mother died when she was very young, and she didn't have a grandmother. So she mostly learned cooking from magazines and books. She was a real reader. So basically, she would learn what to do. At that time, there were no cookbooks or recipes in newspapers regarding Mexican food. So consequently, at home, we grew up with regular fare, as it might be described. And she continued her learning and education within Gourmet magazine and so forth that my dad would bring her home. So it was a different perspective. But my dad's family was here in San Antonio. So yes, they made tamales and buñuelos and so forth, which I did learn from them, even though I wasn't in close contact with them. But then my mother and I did start exploring the whole idea of Mexican food and then regional food, as Adán Medrano describes it, comida de la casa.
Sí.
And then that became my intensive part of research. I'm a researcher, so that's the part that I then did. I had a real cultural awareness, you might say, in terms of who I was, and that who I was determined by more than just the regular food of where I grew up, which was a white neighborhood. We would go to the west side to church, and driving back, we would go to a molinillo and buy corn tortillas. And that was like the most taste treat of all. My dad carried a salt shaker in the car, and on the way back from the west side to the north side, we would eat tortillas with salt, just enjoying the warm tortillas with the salt on them. I think that what I became aware of was mostly the hands that made them.
Yeah.
It didn't matter what color your hands were or from what culture the food came from, as long as you made it with passion and with eagerness to learn about that food.
Yeah, one of the things that we're looking at and I'm curious about is your research around how women have these internal practices or even their lived experiences to cook these traditional foods. What have you learned about that through your research?
Well, not only my research, but my culinary experience, because my mother would make homemade bread. And of course, you would knead the dough. It's the same thing you do when you do tortillas, flour tortillas. You knead the dough and you let it rest in between. And so there are culinary practices that exist among all ethnic and cultural groups. So if you're in a contained neighborhood or situated context, then you learn the context of the food that surrounds you. So comida casera is that of your house. And if you were fortunate enough to have grandparents, of those, and your tias and uncles. So it just depends on how you grew up and where you grew up, and then finding out that part of your own identity is food. Your culture is reflected through the food. So that for me was really important. So the practice of making bread was just carried over to the making of tortillas, the harina, or to making buñuelos, because you have to knead it so well and roll it out so well. So some of those internal practices, I think, were when we made tamales, we worked hard all day getting everything done. And she had always taught me to have the right pots, de barro. So I never make the meat for my tamales in a metal pot, because it doesn't project the same kind of heat nor the same kind of flavor. And so I have huge ollas that you have seen and that I use to cook the meat with, and huge ollas that I use that are made out of barro that I use to amasar all of the dough or the masa for the tamales. So it's respecting those practices that I found out the research were internal. And so I think some of the other things that we use in our informal practices is what I consider the symphony of cooking. You know, I love music. So the symphony of cooking to me is always a sound, and I've got my instruments right here.
Hey.
You know, the chopping.
Yep.
And you chop an onion with like this or fast, and then the jalapeno you go like this in slices, and the tomatoes, it's a softer cut. And so the sounds are different for what you use to cut onions, tomatoes, or whatever. And so the knives that you use are also different. And the other one that I love is the sound, of course, of the, see if you can guess what this one is.
Molcajete.
Recognizable, right?
Yeah.
Recognize. You can't. And this is a really tiny one that's kind of broken because it's so old. I have about 10 molcajetes, and when I teach cooking, I give everybody a molcajete, and then I tell them, you've got to have, for cominos, it's a grinding sound. And once you add the garlic, it's a little bit softer. And once you add the chiles, it's a round. But then you can just play with the sound of a molcajete and talk about historical background. You know, that goes back to, the volcanoes in Mexico, right?
Yep.
And all of these instruments are really in our codices, in Mexico and come forth from our indigenous backgrounds. But you know what I love the best? The instrument that I love the best is a palote. And the palote, I've got a really beautiful one here that I bought in Italy. And it's mechanical engineering in terms of putting stress on a material to roll it out. And so the smaller the rolling pin, the more pressure you can press on it as you roll out the tortilla into a thin thing. If you use the big palote, the one that has the two handles on the side, the big one, that's for rolling out pastry that has a lot of shortening on it. And so if you've got a lot of shortening, it's going to roll out smoothly. You don't need to apply so much pressure. So that lady, whoever she was, probably in the 20s or 30s in South Texas, San Antonio, South Texas, probably told her husband, hey, viejo, get that broomstick that's over there and cut it into a 12-inch thing and then sand it for me, and I'll use that to roll out my tortillas.
Well, that's beautifully said, Ellen. And so how can we learn and appreciate the value of these techniques that you talked about and then honor the women that may not get celebrated the way chefs do?
Of course not. Not even the family appreciates it sometimes, other than to say, oh, it doesn't have enough salt, or you're missing this, or you're missing that, or I don't like the way you changed the recipe. But you're right, we don't value the women that do that. Chefs, they don't work in home kitchens. They work in restaurant kitchens or industrial kitchens. For them, consistency, very precise consistency, is a measure of good food. So their recipes are documented to the grams. You have to measure everything and cook it precisely. And that restaurant then has that reputation. The food always tastes the same. So for us as women in the kitchen, a lot like water for chocolate, it depends on our mood, how our food turns out. And most of the time, of course, it's fantastic. So how do we appreciate that? I think that we've got to make sure that families understand the value of home cooking, or comida casera, understand the work that goes into it, understand the limitations of budget and about the number of people in the family. We don't know the culinary practices of home cooking. We're just starting to bring them out into the public eye. And I'm talking about formal spaces. Do it in a formal space, at a museum, at a whatever, so that everybody becomes aware of why the culinary practices of the home have now extended into the public spaces. Because here in San Antonio, every restaurant is from Jalisco, right? I think every person born in Guadalajara is here in Jalisco, is here in San Antonio. And the reason that we have so many of those restaurants is because the food is reminiscent of what home cooking was. So our comida casera is now entering the small spaces, the small public spaces, but yet the comida casera has changed also because, with a new generation, 2023. Are you going to make tortillas every day? No way. You find out who sells them, who makes the best ones, and buy them. Do you grind every spice you need on the molcajete? No, you probably go find the good ones. I think we need to promote the abilities of contemporary women in the kitchen who serve contemporary food and traditional food, and also about the grandmothers that, like me, that probably, I still cook every day though, that don't cook as much anymore, but to preserve that history. So it's by archiving handwritten recipes, some women do have them, by oral histories, taping all of those homemade recipes, and also to videotape them cooking. I think that's the magic of nowadays, that we can preserve all of this.
Well, thank you so much, Ellen. I really do appreciate you coming to the studio. And as I mentioned, it's always an honor to have you on our programs, whether it's a podcast or one of our shows. And we'll definitely have to catch up next time I'm in San Antonio.
Okay. Come down and we'll cook together.
Yes,
okay?
Let's cook together. I feel so comforted by today's episode. I feel so warm and fuzzy. It made me also think of all the hands that kept me well-fed growing up and that I've also encountered on my aventuras as a taco journalist. As you can tell, I'm really passionate about celebrating these home cooks, these storytellers, these moms, these abuelas, these matriarchs who have what I call Mexican hands. Special thanks to our guests, Dr. Ellen Riojas-Clark and Diana Valera of Tamale House East in Austin, Texas. Shout out to all the hands que amasan some of my favorite tortillas in Texas. The ladies that work in the cocina. Chacho's Tacos in Corpus Christi. Isabel's Cafe in Port Isabel. And all the ladies in their own home kitchens every day. This has been Tacos of Texas podcast, developed and produced by Identity Productions. If you enjoyed today's episode and are craving more taco content, go to our website at www.identity.productions or follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube at Identity Productions and United Tacos of America. This is your host, Mando Échale Manteca Rayo. ¡Vamos a los tacos! On the next Próximo Tacos of Texas, decolonizing tacos. We skip the meat and talk to vegan taqueras and taqueros throughout Texas. And we're not just talking about Meatless Mondays.
The Tacos of Texas podcast is presented by Identity Productions in partnership with KUT and KUTX Studios. Our host and producer is Mando Rayo. Our audio is mixed by Nicholas Worthen and Ever Calderon. Our story producer is me, Sharon Arteaga, and our creative producer is Dennis Burnett. Music was created by Peligrosa in Austin, Texas, and King Benny Productions, located in the Quinto Barrio of Houston.
We're tracing the decisions that gave us the housing situation we have in Austin today. In Growth Machine, how Austin engineered its housing market. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.